This is probably going to make some people mad, but it's got to be said. For an Orthodox Christian, the normal relationship to the appointed authorities of the church is obedience. Now, if your response to that is some version of the phrase blind obedience, then your model of authority isn't Orthodox. It's Protestant. Almost no one other than a few true fanatics actually argues for blind obedience. There are other kinds of obedience than blind obedience. Constant distrust and resistance to authority might be a political virtue, especially in a democracy or a republic. And it certainly is a Protestant ecclesiastical tradition. But it's not how the Orthodox Church functions. Obedience is a virtue, full stop. For example, St. Paul said, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls, as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you." That's in Hebrews 13:17. And who can forget the oft-repeated exhortations from St. Ignatius of Antioch to follow the bishop and the presbyters and the deacons? He uses very strong language for this, saying, for instance, "It is good to know God and the bishop. He who honors the bishop has been honored by God. He who does anything without the bishop's knowledge worships the devil." That's in his letter to the Smyrnaeans, chapter 9, verse 1. The scripture, the fathers, and the other saints never say, "Now this applies only if you agree," or "This applies only if you think church authorities are good people or are doing their job right." On the contrary, these themes get repeated in every place, in every century of church history through wars, schisms, cataclysms, mass apostasy, episcopal corruption, etc. At no point is the norm changed. At no point do the saints tell us to go from being the church of the fathers and the councils to the church of the self-willed and self-appointed, the church where every man does what is right in his own eyes. If you're obedient only when you've picked apart everything church authorities say and decided you agree with it all, you're not actually obedient. You might be collaborating, but probably not. But that's not obedience. Now, of course, we are not called to follow leaders into sin. Of course not. But if our default response to their leading is to assume it's sin unless proven otherwise, to treat everything with suspicion, then we are not practicing the virtue of obedience. And we are also contributing to schism. And if we encourage other people to have the same attitude, then we, in fact, are the ones leading people into sin. Now, I've read some say that the ecclesiology of obedience found in the scripture and the fathers does not apply because we are living in a time of Antichrist. But such a claim reveals an ignorance of the Orthodox tradition and an ignorance especially of the scriptures, in which even the earliest Christian leaders were confronted by antichrists. St. John says, "Children, it is the last hour. And as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many antichrists have come. Therefore we know that it is the last hour." That's 1 John 2:18. We've always had antichrists with us, and yet never did the church institute a theology of resistance to authority, when we can cast off our bishops because we've decided that the end of the world is coming. Indeed, we've been living in the last days ever since the Messiah came. The norms of church life were given to us by Christ and his apostles precisely within the context of assaults by antichrists. The normal relationship to church authority is obedience. Yes, sometimes we have to respectfully disobey if the authority really is leading into sin, to obey God rather than man. But what comes next then? If we follow the example of the saints who righteously disobeyed, then we also patiently accept whatever consequences come as a result of our righteous disobedience. Suffering patiently for righteousness' sake forms us in holiness. If someone encourages you to disobey, but you don't see him patiently and lovingly accepting the consequences of his own righteous disobedience, if you see that the fruit of his teachings in others is not patience and long-suffering, then you've got every reason to believe he's not doing it righteously. If we were meant by Christ to make resistance to a church authority normal, to make questioning church authority normal, he would have said so. His apostles would have said so. The fathers would have said so. But they didn't. They said the opposite. Now, one last thought I'll leave you with. If the bishops and the priests and the deacons are bad, then won't they get away with it unless the righteous masses rise up against them? No. God will judge them. He may well judge them through his appointed authorities in the church. Bishops are judged by synods of bishops, while priests and deacons are judged by their own bishops. If you're not the appointed judge, then you have no right, according to Christian tradition, to judge another man's servant, as St. Paul says in Romans 14:4. But even if they escape judgment in this life, God himself will judge them at the last judgment. If you think that isn't enough, that you have to judge them too, then you're not only not Orthodox, you're not even Christian. That should give us a very long pause before we decide to go the other way on this.